Greetings and welcome to today's healthcare provider program brought to you by Living Beyond Breast Cancer. At this time, all participants are in a listen-only mode. This webinar is being recorded. I would now like to turn the program over to your host, Stephanie Washburn.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's healthcare provider program on developing strategies for supporting mental health in patients from the LGBTQIA+ breast cancer community. We're glad you could join us. My name is Stephanie Washburn, and I'm the Manager of Healthcare Provider Outreach at Living Beyond Breast Cancer, or LBBC. I'm pleased to serve as your moderator today. In case you're just getting to know us at LBBC, we're a national nonprofit organization that offers trusted information and a community of support to people affected by breast cancer. This program is part of LBBC's Young Women's Initiative, which provides resources tailored to meet the specific needs of young people diagnosed with breast cancer before age 45. This initiative began in 2011 when we were awarded a cooperative agreement with the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention to expand our programming. This CDC funding continues today. We selected today's topic because of its importance to people with breast cancer and healthcare providers alike. Our speakers, Cassandra Falby and Victoria Seamon, will help us understand the unique barriers experienced by the LGBTQIA+ community and offer ways for you to help support your patient's mental health. We thank Cassandra and Victoria for sharing their time and insights with us today, and you'll learn more about them shortly. We'd like to draw your attention to several LBBC resources that we hope will be helpful. If you missed session 1 in this two-part series, Developing Trust, Inclusivity, and a Welcoming Clinical Space with Drs. Chandler Cortina and Julian Sanchez, or would like to watch it again, please visit lbbc.org/inclusive-care. To learn more about healthcare disparities in the LGBTQIA+ cancer community, coping with emotions, and the experiences of people from the community like Jay Truskowski and Allison Gruber, visit lbbc.org/LGBTQ+. You will receive links by email after the program so you can share this information with your patients and colleagues. So now we'll move on to a few final details before the presentation. Today, we'll be using the chat to connect during the program. You'll see the chat icon at the bottom of your screen. We'll also be using the Q&A feature. Please submit questions at any time. We ask that you frame your questions so they can be helpful to all participants. Our speakers will respond to as many questions as possible after the presentation. You can set up closed captioning by going to the button at the bottom of your screen. We will be emailing you a link to an evaluation after the program. Your feedback is very important to us in planning future webinars, and we appreciate you taking the time to share your input. Now, just a few words about contact hours and CEs. This activity was approved by Montana Nurses Association, an accredited approver with distinction by the American Nurses Credentialing Center's Commission on Accreditation for 1.25 contact hours. It was also approved by the National Association of Social Workers for 1 CE and by the Patient Advocate Certification Board for 1 JEDI-CE. If you've registered to receive contact hours or CEs, you are required to participate in the entire live webinar and complete the evaluation by October 12th. You will then be emailed your certificate by November 9th. Certificates of participation will also be available upon request for providers from other disciplines. None of the planners or presenters for this educational activity have relevant financial relationships to disclose with ineligible companies, except for our program's nurse planner, Lori Rinaldo, who has been a speaker with CGen and Myriad Genetics. All of the relevant financial relationships listed for this individual have been mitigated. We are recording the session and will post it on the program webpage in about a week or two. We'll notify you via email when the recording is available. Our objectives for today's program are to help healthcare providers understand key aspects of mental health in the LGBTQIA+ community, definitions of family in the community, the emotional impact of a cancer diagnosis on LGBTQIA+ people and their loved ones, barriers to care for the LGBTQIA+ community, and strategies for supporting mental health in LGBTQIA+ people with cancer. So it's now my pleasure to introduce our expert speaker, Cassandra Falby, who owns a psychotherapy practice in the San Francisco Bay Area. They provide therapy to individuals, couples, and families. Cassandra's relational approach is particularly beneficial for BIPOC-identified individuals, LGBTQIA+ folks, children of immigrants, neurodivergent individuals, and those living with chronic illness. Their clinical interests include intergenerational trauma and healing, values-based therapeutic interventions, and the impact of disability and chronic illness on self-concept. With almost 30 years of experience, Cassandra has been involved in social justice and equity movements since their grassroots organizing days in the Midwest. They remain an advocate for historically marginalized communities and are dedicated to fostering inclusive environments where individuals can authentically be themselves and thrive. Cassandra, we're happy to have you with us today. It's also my pleasure to introduce patient advocate Victoria Seamon, a licensed professional clinical counselor and breast cancer survivor who finds purpose in combining her two pathways as she shares her story. She is a trained leadership volunteer in LBBC's Young Advocate program. Victoria is passionate about speaking on topics related to financial toxicity and healthcare disparities among Black women in the cancer community. Additionally, she aims to provide a voice to those who may feel voiceless. She feels called to use her talents to bring hope and healing to others. Things that bring her joy are cooking, listening to music, gardening, and travel. Welcome, Cassandra and Victoria. Cassandra, please join us on screen to share your presentation. I'll now turn things over to you. Cassandra, I think you might need to unmute.
Thank you.
Sure.
I knew that was going to happen.
It always does.
But it's really great to be here, as I was saying. I'm just really thrilled to be able to share space with you all and talk about issues of breast cancer related to LGBTQIA+ individuals. So what I'll do right now is I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and then we'll go ahead and get started. Right. So first, I just want to start out with the fact that I am right now sitting in and on the unceded land of the Chochenyo Muecma Ohlone people. That is actually in Oakland, California. So just want to kind of make that mention so you know where I do my work. And that this is where I physically locate myself. So I wanted to start out with just this quote from Audre Lorde: "The quality of light by which we scrutinize our lives has direct bearing upon the product which we live and upon the changes which we hope to bring about through those lives." So as some of you may know, Audre Lorde, poet, essayist, author, activist, passed away from breast cancer. And really a lot of what she wrote about, she really spoke from her heart and spoke from what her experience was as an artist, as a Black woman, as a Black lesbian, living with a breast cancer diagnosis. And so I mentioned this statement, this quote, because I think there's a way that we have to, as practitioners, we as part of a variety of communities, how we show up for patients, how we show up for other community members is incredibly important. How we have to think about, how do we create safe spaces where people can thrive? How do we create spaces where, in the case of many of the folks here, how do we create spaces related to care and healing, related to breast cancer treatment, where LGBTQIA individuals can engage with care and feel welcome, can feel safe. So one of the themes that I want us to kind of think about throughout my presentation today is, that I may come back to at times too, is around safety. That when people feel safe, it's amazing what we can do together and also what people can do individually. So thinking about how do you create safe spaces, and also when space is safe, how does that impact an individual's mental health, right? How comfortable do they feel? How are the ways that they're able to engage with care, with treatment planning, with even being diagnosed, right? So just kind of thinking about that key part and the worries and concerns that can come up. So if we pull back a little bit and we look at how any of us get to exist in spaces, and again, this idea of safety, we have to really look at the current political climate as it relates to LGBTQIA people. So right now, the ACLU is tracking almost 500 anti-LGBTQ bills in the United States. If you have been paying attention to the news, watching different news reports, watching to look at legislation that's happening in a variety of states, bills that have been passed, there has been really this kind of press, this full court press, this attack related to LGBTQIA people, right? And so when we look at that, we see that in terms of anti-trans bills, we see that related to gender policing as far as bathroom usage, and that's in the public space, also in schools as well. We've seen in Tennessee the criminalization of drag performance. Some school systems are also looking at really kind of controlling pronoun usage by students. So even though some of these things are happening in spaces like schools or in spaces like performance communities, this impacts all of us. This impacts the way that we can move through spaces, the comfort that we have, and also just how stressful that can be, how stressful it is to not feel welcome in spaces that you wish that you could be a part of. And really, we're also looking, when we pull out as well, we're looking at kind of ongoing victimization of trans folks, specifically how frequently Black trans women are murdered. So this is kind of, we have to kind of hold this, that with the spaces that we inhabit when folks are going to work, when folks are out in their communities, that it's not necessarily safe for everyone. So that is folded into how individuals are feeling regarding their stress levels, depression, anxiety, safety, comfort, and levels of fear, and having to navigate through mixed spaces where you are meant to feel unwelcome or you feel like an outsider. So just to kind of hold in mind that outside of treatment spaces, outside of clinical spaces, patients are having to move in a world that isn't necessarily welcoming and safe for who they are. So I just wanted to kind of have a brief mention here around terminology, definitions. I won't spend a lot of time here because these are things that you can kind of do your own investigation on and so forth. But just I did want to mention some terms that you may have seen or that you might see: SOGI, which is sexual orientation, gender identity and expression. SGM is really looking at the same gender kind of engagement, right? And SGL as well, we're looking at same gender loving, terminology like cis sexism, heterosexism, as well as how we make sure to use gender pronouns in terms of how we introduce ourselves, how we inquire about the gender pronouns of other individuals. So these are just some kind of things that I wanted to kind of mention here, right? Gender pronouns, kind of inquiring about others' gender pronouns, different types of relationship orientations, whether folks identify as polyamorous, whether they identify as non-monogamous, making also this inquiry regarding patients in terms of family. What does family look like? There's family of origin, but for many people, because of their lack of connection to their family of origin, they've created chosen family, and we'll talk about that a little later. Also, the idea of folks who are part of our communities who identify as trans masculine and trans feminine. So really, and I think that this was touched on in the earlier presentation, is how do you cultivate space where folks can feel comfortable? Some of that is really related to taking the time to learn terminology, to learn how individuals want to be referred to, and being able to incorporate that in conversations. That's a way to kind of let folks know that their identities are welcome and valued, and that they can feel safer in those spaces. So this is data from Gallup. And as you can see, over the past 10 years, this is there's been an increase in terms of how folks identify. So this was the question: which of the following do you consider yourself to be? And then folks could select whatever they felt best explained and best spoke to them. And so folks are feeling that they're more folks who are identifying as something other than heterosexual, and that has been increasing. And another thing to note is that in Gen Z population, that is also increasing. So as we are serving the LGBTQIA community in communities regarding healthcare, regarding different medical systems, we need to be aware that more people are identifying as queer or trans. And so we need to create spaces that are caring and supportive, so that way folks are more likely to engage with systems of care. So just briefly, who are LGBTQIA folks in population? So again, roughly 7.2%. I've also heard numbers as high as 11 or 12% of the population currently. I've noted here kind of a racial breakdown. Here you can kind of take a look at that data here, around 10%, 10 or 11%. Black or of African descent, around 20% Latine, roughly 2.5% Native American, roughly 5% Asian American, and about 5.5% Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander, the majority being over half being white. But just that there is also a variety and a mix of how the makeup of the LGBTQIA population, that we are a wide variety of people. We have a wide variety of ways that we identify racially and ethnically. In terms of mental health of LGBTQIA folks, 53% report being threatened with violence. So the kind of scenarios we're talking about are perhaps in your own neighborhood. It might be when you are going to the store, kind of going about your business, going to work. So those types of traumatic experiences can really have a negative impact on one's mental health. Then when we kind of refine that a little more, 62% of folks who are trans identified worry about being judged when seeking healthcare. So it is useful to hold that in mind when we are looking at the clients and the patients and the communities that we serve. How do we create spaces that are able to receive, again, receive a wide variety of people? So factors that impact LGBTQIA people living with cancer. So there's some ways where once an individual has a cancer diagnosis, there are a variety of things that can impact how they navigate that process and that experience. So there is this idea of outness, right? And so there are different life domains. So to think that if someone is out, they may not be out in all areas of their life. So they may be out at work, depending on what their job is. They may not be out to their family of origin, or they may be out to friends, relatives, but at work, they're not out. So that is also an additional stressor of having to kind of maintain kind of compartmentalizing their lives, right? And being in specific domains, being in specific environments where they can or can't be out. And that push and pull is incredibly stressful. There's increased anxiety that can increase incidents of depression and so forth. So just to kind of think and hold in mind that having a diagnosis, a cancer diagnosis, and then kind of figuring out who is going to know about that and what domains, and then also folding in the fact of their queerness or their transness and the impact of that on how they may engage in treatment. The next is a support system. So we had mentioned before this idea of family. And so family for queer and trans people, for LGBTQIA people, their support system can be made up of folks who are family of origin folks, can be chosen family, can be friends. So that support system can be made up of a variety of different types of people in their lives. So just to kind of hold that in mind, that if the individual is feeling isolated, that's something that can be an additional stressor, that they feel that they have to hold on to what it means to navigate treatment, what it means to attend chemo appointments, a variety of things that that individual is having to hold. But if they have a support system, the hope is that lightens their emotional load. Healthcare access. If an individual, and I guess I should say this in terms of healthcare access, it's not just having healthcare access to having health insurance. It's also being able to get to the hospital, be able to engage with treatment, being able to attend appointments regularly. So access kind of on one scale is actually being insured, big picture, but kind of in kind of more practical ways, it's also about being able to get to healthcare centers for treatment that allow that individual to engage in care in their treatment plan. Mentioning here too the idea of being able to speak truthfully about one's life without judgment. So that in many ways relates to the first bullet point of outness. For some folks who are not part of the LGBTQIA community, who are not queer and trans, what they're able to do related to their gender identity, their sexual orientation, is they can just, it's more easy to proceed through different systems. They can speak about their boyfriend, their girlfriend, their husband, their wife, and not have to feel the stress of feeling judged, of feeling that perhaps you won't receive the best quality treatment regarding cancer, that somehow you are not welcome to be there. So that is something that is a stressor for folks, is really being able to show up fully. And when queer and trans folks have to show up in different spaces and show up as part of themselves, that can be where they're having to hide themselves, that can really be something that sets in motion low mood, depression, increased stress, and things of that nature. Related cissexism and transphobia, that again, going in and engaging in treatment, going in even to be screened, even for a cancer screening, and having to hold that burden of, is this person or are these people going to treat me with respect? Am I going to have to go in and have to kind of do a lot of education, teaching of how how they'll treat me? So those elements have been and are present for folks, and can be a deterrent, right? Those things can be a deterrent in terms of wanting to even engage in healthcare, engaging with treatment. I've also mentioned binary if therefore frameworks. So this really speaks to gender presentation and what it is for folks who are, let's say, going in for screening or going in for treatment, what they have to kind of navigate in terms of how they appear to other individuals. So they may not be asked their gender pronouns. They may feel kind of a bit vigilant about and undue stress for how they have to engage in with systems of care, in addition to navigating what it means to have cancer. So there are these kind of different levels. There is additional impact where they're not necessarily able to focus on just their treatment, just their health. They have this additional stressor of people assuming that if they look a certain way, that they identify as male, or that they identify as female, or even if there are certain ways that they look, that they may not again receive treatment in respectful way. I want to mention something called minority stress theory, and there are two different types. So minority stress theory is this theory that is that really is about this additional stress that sexual and gender minority groups experience, and these things, the stress, really does impact mental health outcomes. As I was mentioning before, there are these ways that folks are able to navigate the world and kind of have to deal with things that if you are not from a sexual or gender minority group, that you don't have to navigate with those types of stressors. And so it's this additional pressure, this additional concern that is present as you move through the world. So there are two different types as named by Meyer. One is proximal and one is distal, and we'll just quickly kind of go through those. So as it relates to minority stress theory, proximal is kind of what is happening in one's internal landscape. So those types of stressors, those types of factors. So there are things like anticipatory anxiety. So perhaps what it feels like if you are, let's say, entering a store and you are really nervous and really anxious about how you might be treated as you enter the store based on your gender presentation, how you're perceived. So that is something that is an additional weight and is an additional concern. And really, it also relates to one's safety, right? As I'd mentioned before, that level of anxiety that is present, and hoping that when you're in different spaces, in variety of spaces, that you will be able to feel safe And that's not always the case. There's also an internal dialogue regarding kind of how one speaks to themselves, right? There's the idea of, am I enough? Do I present in a certain way enough? And also related to this internal dialogue regarding what other people are thinking. And so there's this kind of way where it kind of is related to as well anticipatory anxiety, but there is this internal conversation that is happening even as, let's say, walking down the street. Should I go this direction? Should I go to the right here? Can I go in that store? Or you shouldn't go in that store. So there, sometimes for queer and trans folks, there can be an internal dialogue, and generally it relates to safety. There are also challenges related to self-image. Also managing feelings of rejection and exclusion. And as well, there is this way of how does one maintain safety in the aggression, in the face of aggression from others. So again, I think, really to see this proximal type of stress as an umbrella related to this internal dialogue. So what's happening inside for this individual? What are the conversations that they're having? How are they able to engage in self-soothing practices? And that can be really difficult as they are moving through spaces and they are uncertain about the level of safety that they're going to experience in those spaces. So we mentioned proximal. Now we'll move to distal. So distal, these are things that are happening outside of the individual, right? So we're talking about systems of care. We're talking about things happening, interactions with family of origin, with communities in general. So distal is kind of what's happening in the environment. There is active or passive marginalization. That is a concern and an additional emotional stressor when engaging with systems of care, potentially, right? Cissexism and heterosexism, potential physical violence, and that can be in the form of actual physical violence that are experienced and threats, verbal violence as well. As we started out, discriminatory legislation. So when kind of like the environment, when the space, when kind of the air is filled with negativity of oppressive legislation related to queer and trans people, that can be an additional stressor. That can be, these can be factors that increase anxiety, that increase depression, low mood, and things of that nature. Also increase isolation as well. And finally, related to distal, we're talking about here two-dimensional healthcare. And what I mean by that is not treating the whole person. Again, this idea where a person who has a cancer diagnosis, let's say a woman who identifies as bisexual, she wants to be seen as her full self. She wants to be seen if she's being treated for receiving cancer care, breast cancer care. She wants to be able to hopefully be able to receive as someone who can show up fully and be able to talk about what her experiences are, talk about what's challenging for her, and also be able to be as honest and open as possible about how she's feeling in terms of her mental health. So that is something too that can add that stress, is going into places and not being certain that you'll be able to be fully who you are. So we'll kind of go through these here and kind of, these all kind of relate, we'll kind of go through the flow here. So there is an importance of attuning to LGBTQIA folks, the community's needs. We want to be able to facilitate improved health outcomes, increased engagement in systems of care, and that just understanding that there's a growing population as we saw earlier, that there are more people as the years pass who are identifying as queer, trans, as LGBTQIA. And one thing to hold is this is not just about LGBTQIA individuals, right? What we need to understand is this is really about kind of broader public health, that when communities benefit, when everyone has what they need, right? So when we're looking at general public health, when the folks who generally have the least access, folks who are marginalized, historically marginalized, when those folks have what they need, in general, the community benefits. So really looking at that in terms of mental health. If mental health needs of individuals who are from marginalized populations are met, the likelihood is that in general, everyone's needs will be met. So we talked a little bit about the minority stress and what was happening in terms of proximal, right? The kind of what's happening internally. And so when we're looking at the impact of a cancer diagnosis on internal landscape, or we're looking at the emotional impact and the impact in terms of mental health, there are worries and concerns, obviously, about what it means to be diagnosed with cancer. Questions related to how did this happen? What does this mean for my life? How long have I had cancer? So there are worries and concerns and potentially stories that are kind of created around what it means to have a cancer diagnosis. As well, there are worries about roles and responsibilities related to family, work, who is going to, while I'm in treatment, who is going to take care of my children, who's going to take care of my parents if I'm a caregiver. So really kind of looking at those additional worries and concerns, those stressors, and how those can impact day-to-day functioning of queer and trans folks. As well, there's grief and loss related to one's health, the physical body, if there are surgical procedures, mastectomy, double mastectomy, how one heals from those experiences. And also something that's less about the physical and more about the relational piece is grief and loss related to relationships. What happens for individuals in terms of who are their support communities? Not everyone necessarily wants to or is able to be present while someone is going through cancer. So sometimes there is grief and loss around loss of relationships. Sadness, again, I've mentioned before, low mood and depression. Those kind of develop in terms of kind of questions around the bigger picture of what is the cancer diagnosis? What does my cancer diagnosis mean for my life? How do I engage with my day-to-day, how I feel physically, and just the changing physical body going through cancer experience. And I mentioned here fear of recurrence. I think it's useful to note that that because of how folks, queer and trans folks, have historically been treated by some systems of care, by some medical practitioners, they may be shy or just really vigilant about going to see medical care providers for checkups and so forth, based on experiences that they've had, based on experiences that other people they know have had. So that also is kind of a factor of staying away when really there needs to be a space created where they can feel safe, where they can feel ease to be able to engage with regular checkups. And also finally, activation of PTSD. So kind of being able to hold previous experiences and those experiences that may have happened in childhood or or as adolescents or as adults related to CPTSD or PTSD experiences, that maybe they have worked on that through their own therapy, individual therapy, or even family therapy. But now with the presence of cancer, it kind of activates that trauma and kind of kicks that into gear. So it can be challenging for folks to navigate that as well. So it can be something that happened a long time ago, but because of the cancer diagnosis, it could kick into gear old trauma and old experiences, flashbacks, and so forth. All right. So the final thing I want to do is I just want to kind of go through here and kind of talk a little bit about what family means. And we'll kind of go through this. We'll come back to this perhaps in a little bit. Really looking at what those differences between family of origin, chosen family, and those differences really have to do with how family of origin has accepted that individual. Is the family of origin, are they folks that that individual can lean on? So maybe they've come out, maybe they were kicked out of the house, or maybe they've come out and they don't talk about what it means to be queer or trans, that those aren't topics that they can talk about with their family. So being able to create chosen family is what individuals really kind of move toward, because of, so that way there isn't this decreased isolation. So chosen family is a phrase, is a way of living, is a way of being that queer and trans folks have had to create, that we've had to create for ourselves. There are also different family structural situations, living situations, where there are blended families, maybe that there are families living together. But just to really kind of think about the fact that family for queer and trans folks isn't always about what's legal, isn't always about what the government acknowledges, but it's about really intentional, intimate connections. So when you are engaging with your patients, asking about who their chosen family are, who their supports are, in addition to asking about family of origin. All right. So what I want to do is I want us to kind of move here, because what I'd like to do is have a moment when we can hear a little bit from, and we'll come back to those slides in a moment. We'll hear a little bit from patient advocate. I'm going to pass the baton on to Victoria Seamon. She's going to share some about her experience, her lived experience, and we'll just pass the baton on to Victoria.
Thank you, Cassandra, and thank you everyone for having me. So again, my name is Victoria Seamon, and I am a young advocate with LBBC, and I am so passionate about the cancer community since this whole journey has been, without a doubt, life-changing. So I was diagnosed with breast cancer August 26th of 2020 at the age of 34. And so I remember the words of, okay, once we finish your PET scan and other tests, we can get you in within a week or two for surgery. And so to me, that was a sign that time was running out. So with a quickness, I went from you have cancer to here's treatment we suggest. And once a few tests and scans return, we'll schedule you for surgery. I was young, faced with navigating this scary diagnosis and also during a pandemic. I didn't know what questions to ask. I didn't know what questions the doctors should have asked of me. You know, as I share my story, I think about the things I wish I had known. I wish doctors had known about me or simply asked me. And so from the time I was diagnosed to the time there was a treatment plan in place, everything happened fast. And I had to make a lot of life-changing decisions very quickly. You know, I look back and I think to myself, something I wish I had been asked is, do you have kids? Do you want kids? Do you have a partner? tell me more, and told on the front end that the type of cancer you have may prevent you from being able to have kids of your own in the future. So me, I was diagnosed with invasive ductal carcinoma, stage 3, grade 3, ER, PR positive, HER2 negative. And I received all this information and a long list of additional medical jargon very early on. And it was a lot to take in. And without a doubt, it took a mental toll on me. And so I personally work in the mental health field as well. And so I knew how to advocate right away and asked if there was a therapist I could meet with. And as I think about navigating this diagnosis, I without a doubt do give credit to doctors out there because they definitely know their medical stuff hands down. And one thing I wish I had more of were moments of pause where providers would ask me, how am I dealing with my diagnosis and how am I feeling? And so I call that a compassion check. And you don't have to be a mental health professional to do that. And so for me, cancer took a physical toll on me. I developed neuropathy and became limited from being more active. Cancer took an emotional toll on me, on having to navigate treatment without family due to the pandemic. And it stole something from me. It took away my opportunity to be a mom. And I'll talk more about that a little bit later. And, cancer took a mental toll on me. So worries about body image. Do I have all the information? And what happens next? Something I want providers to know is I may present as good on the outside, and it's not always the case on the inside. It's the repeat traumas of the ongoing treatments and the reminders that cancer has taken a lot from me. I remember early on getting several brochures and packets of information, and one of them was about freezing eggs. And so I spoke with my nurse navigator about this, and quickly I learned that it was a cost prohibitive thing. And so I couldn't afford that. And again, it seemed like time was running out. And at the time, I did not know how to advocate for myself or inquire if things could be slowed down. And, Cassandra, I was thinking about the conversation we were having about time, and it was stated beautifully, that there's time and then there's queer time. And I define queer time as it's the planning, it's the finding resources, it's the strife, it's the challenges, it's the financial costs, and the list goes on. To me, it basically means that there's way more planning involved with pregnancy for same-sex couples, and there's a lot at stake to not have a guaranteed pregnancy. And so when I compare that to heterosexual couples, I think, they may not have to invest as much money and resources are more easily accessible. So things look very different when you're in a same-sex relationship. It's like being caught between a rock and a hard place. So having this cancer diagnosis that seems really time sensitive and wanting kids, but learning very quickly that those hopes and dreams are dwindling away as you come to terms with your own sexuality and the feelings that time and the medical system is not on your side. And those were very hard things for me to reconcile with. And in my story, I was in a situation where I couldn't have kids of my own due to the cancer treatment, and my partner could not also, or would have a very difficult time conceiving due to her own health. And so I simply wish providers asked more questions about my family or my future family. And so I'll close with this. Um, my partner asked me if I felt I chose right. And she was referring to going through with treatment right away as opposed to pursuing pregnancy. And my response was that, it's a hard question. And I really don't know if I made the right decision. And I also don't know if I had the option. And so my ask is, so for providers, please look through an inclusive lens, ask about families and what's important to your patients identifying as LGBTQ plus, and do those compassion checks with your patients. And, even if you don't have all the answers, simply checking in can be enough. And when dealing with such a heavy diagnosis, kindness goes such a long way. So thank you for hearing my story.
Thank you, Victoria. Thank you so much for your share. So what I'd like to do just with the last few minutes we have, I do want to, I'm going to go back to share my screen. And so I do want to, we can talk about the barriers for impactful care. We kind of talked a little bit about this earlier. Was around kind of practice access. But really that one of the key things for this slide, I think I want to emphasize is how important trust and safety are for patients to feel and how much that's rooted in the relationship. So, one of the questions that patients may ask is, okay, we're kind of going down this treatment path, but is it going to address my needs? And, as Victoria was sharing, kind of, that she had specific considerations and that there were these kind of two paces that were happening simultaneously in terms of things that were incredibly important to her. So thinking about inclusivity and thinking about the relationship and thinking about what is the kind of relationship that you have with your patient, and how are you getting to know your patient? How aware are you of what their core needs are regarding treatment, regarding how they want to live their lives? In terms of supporting LGBTQIA folks with cancer, one of the key things is to not make assumptions, right? And to normalize and help facilitate a connection to mental health support, and inquire about who their support networks are, and kind of understanding who those folks are. Are they friends? Are they partners? Are they lovers? Are they family? Kind of inquiring. And it might be that they have, more than one partner. So just kind of doing these gentle inquiries just to get a sense of who is going to be there to support individuals, to support patients on their path, as well as, obviously providing resources, online support, and so forth. But one thing that I think has been, that might be helpful as well, is when you're engaging with patients, when you're having your, time to explore and have conversation with them, asking them about what are their 3 biggest concerns or stressors before they had cancer, and to identify and see, are those still concerns, to kind of get a sense of the broader landscape of their lives. So that way you are aware of the different pieces and different elements that are present. So in terms of how to support mental health of LGBTQIA folks who have cancer diagnosis, connecting folks to one-on-one therapy, and can be a huge support, a huge help. There are some organizations that offer free therapy. I know here in the Bay Area, there are a few organizations that are able to offer a certain number of free therapy sessions for folks who have a cancer diagnosis, just as they're navigating that experience. Doing regular check-ins. So when you meet with patients, not just checking in on how they're feeling physically, how they're feeling in terms of their nausea, their energy level, but also checking in with how they're feeling emotionally. Even asking questions like, okay, since we saw each other last, asking this broader question of like, what's it been like to be you? And then when they're responding, really kind of listening to what they're sharing. Again, this is process of really doing intentional listening and slowing down. to hear what their experience is like and how they are feeling in terms of their emotional health, their mental health, their psychic health. One of the final things I do want to mention on this slide is the assumption that for post-surgical care tools, garments, and so forth, that what's most available aren't gender neutral options. So there's certain garments and even locations and spaces that may not be in alignment with how an individual, let's say, who's had a double mastectomy, they don't necessarily align with the options that are available for post-surgical garments, tools, and so forth. So just to kind of expand your understanding of places that may offer more gender neutral options. All right. Just to wrap for my presentation today, just some key things to pay attention to: sociopolitical events related to LGBTQIA folks. So this is outside, right? So when you're not actually working with your clients, paying attention to the news, noting what's happening in the world and how those events impact queer and trans folks, because that is the world in which queer and trans folks are having to engage with. That is the world in which we're having to live. Having nonverbal cues to communicate safety, things like introducing yourself and stating what your gender pronouns are, maybe on a pin, having a pride flag, having signs up, those types of things that help to create and increase the likelihood of your patients coming out, and really to reduce that stress, really to reduce the anxiety and the worry around the type and quality of care that they will receive. Taking a moment to think about whether you're asking questions that allow your patient to share more fully who they are, because that's really what's going to facilitate engaging with treatment more fully, where they can feel more relaxed, more connected. There'll be greater transparency, and they're more likely to share what's going on with them emotionally, what their stressors are, even what might be going well, but to really engage in that way. Again, refrain from making assumptions, and really being able to co-create the care plan with the patient. And that is more likely to happen when that patient feels safe, they feel more relaxed and more secure. So thinking about, like, what are the ways that I can hold space? What are the ways that I can engage with my clients and my patients where they can feel more at ease and just more safe. All right, that's the end of my presentation for today. I appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thank you both so very much. And everybody, please stay on with us. We have some additional time with Cassandra and Victoria to go through some questions that you've asked. But I just want to first thank you both so very much for the information shared, for your experiences shared. Victoria, you probably haven't been able to see them. There are a number of comments and thank yous in the chat for you being so generous in sharing your story. And Cassandra, we've got a number of questions for you. So hopefully everybody can hang on with us. We've got about 15 more minutes. We'll get through as many questions as we can. We had some people who were submitting questions ahead of time, so I've got them from a variety of sources. But I'd like to start with one that just came in from one of our audience members, which was is a question specifically for Victoria, although Cassandra, feel free to comment as well from your perspectives after Victoria does, if you'd like to. So Victoria, did you feel that the medical team honored that the experience you were going to was grief and acknowledged your losses? So did your team acknowledge your experience, or how did they?
Sure. I don't feel as though, and I feel like that was something that I I think was another one of those things that I wish I had more of. Because I think one, sex and sexuality is not talked about quite often. I have noticed within the medical field and those individuals, dealing with a cancer diagnosis. There's a lot of body changes, and most of my providers didn't talk about it. I did have one that, did bring up some of those topics, but um, yeah, I don't think it was really acknowledged very much. And really the impact with my age and knowing that I have to be on this medicine for the next 10 years and it stole my opportunity to biologically have my own kids. So it's something I want more of for providers to, speak to it and acknowledge it. So
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing your experiences with this as well. Cassandra, is there anything you would want to add about kind of that acknowledgement of loss or grief on the healthcare provider side?
Well, I think just holding space for that to be an ongoing part of the conversation, right? I think that there's so many conversations that may seem that they happen within a certain window of time, but I think that the intensity of grief can be present and kind of can come back and be more present, and so I think it's just continuing to just to be curious, right? To inquire about, maybe one time it seems like, oh, grief isn't as present, but there can be something else that has happened where grief is way more present. So just to continue to check in around grief and loss, the emotional piece as well as the physical piece.
Thank you so much. So we have another interesting question that just came in, and then after that, I may also take a peek at the ones that people were thoughtful enough to submit to us ahead of time and see what we can get to today. So somebody just wrote in a few minutes ago, do you have any advice for working on going a bit beyond knowing in general what terminology means? Something I've noticed that other folks struggle with is not just learning and understanding the terminology, but reckoning with the intra-community nuances and when that dialogue changes, something that you don't necessarily need to follow if you're not in the conversation. I myself then struggle to know how best to support them learning to reframe the vocabulary list as a starting point, not an ending point.
I'm curious too to hear from you, Victoria, around this as well. I think in general there is this concern around messing something up, right? You don't want to say the wrong thing, and I get it. It comes out of a place of respect. There may be some kind of the concerns around shame, and so what I would say is to try, right? And then if there is a stumble, if there is a hiccup, just to apologize and keep it moving, right? Just to say, like, if let's say it's around a term and maybe something is shifted and you didn't get the memo or you weren't really sure and someone corrects you, that's an opportunity really to learn and to re-up. So just to say, like, oh, I didn't know, I'm very sorry, and then keep it moving. Just to apologize and keep it moving.
Great. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you in saying that, for actually making space for people to be where they are in this situation and to grow. How about you, Victoria? Any thoughts on that?
yeah, I mean, I agree. And I know that was, one of the things that I was kind of meditating on and just the thought that sometimes people, worry about bringing things up or even asking questions because they fear of, making a mistake or offending someone. And, like Cassandra said, I mean, it's, just try. I mean, I think that really emphasizes that you actually care. And so that's demonstrating care and concern. And then if you do mess up, I mean, again, just apologize, and really just keep it moving. And so you just got to try.
Okay, great. Thank you. Somebody asked a question I want to go back to, which you both touched on while you were speaking earlier, and I'm wondering if you might share a little bit more about this idea of queer time. Can you give us a little bit more information about that, whether it's specifically within the cancer context or just kind of the context of life overall? Is there anything else you can help us to understand with that?
Victoria, you go first and then I'll follow.
Okay. All right. All right. Yeah, it's oh my goodness. Yeah, like some of the things that I was mentioning, so it's the fact that it looks different. So like a heterosexual couple, right? There's like a man, there's a woman, and they can, I'm using hand gestures, they can conceive more easily, because there's the two parts that are needed. Now with the same sex couple, it's like, okay, well, we got to find, like, so for two women, oh, okay, well, we have to find a sperm donor. We have to, go to the clinic. We have to, do all the research and figure out the whole process. And we do run the risk of, it being unsuccessful. And so there's so much time that it takes. And for me, specifically thinking about this whole cancer diagnosis, it seemed very urgent, and like I had to like get into surgery very quickly. And so there's no way that I could have, done, I think it's weekly injections, towards eventually freezing my eggs. There just wasn't the time. And so as a queer individual, my time looks different. So
Thank you. How about you, Cassandra?
Well, I mean, I think that if we even go back to, and thank you, Victoria, for sharing that. Um, I think if we look at kind of queer time and trans time as just very different, right? Like when we think about even for children that looks different, even there's already a path, there's already kind of like, there's certain timestamps around like developmental markers that you do at a certain time if you're straight, or if you kind of are moving through if you don't identify as queer or trans, there's like these specific markers of time. But if you're queer or trans, you're walking a whole different, usually a different path, right? In terms of how you can be out, how you can share about your first crush, how you can date, when that even gets to start, how it even feels to be part of community. So those markers are at different points in time. So when we talk about, like when I talk about queer time, even what it means to form community, what it means to maybe even build a home, what it means to have children, as Victoria was saying, like it's the time markers are very different because the path is really very much it's more straight and kind of more straight and cis in that way.
Thank you. There's so much kind of rich context in everything that you are both saying today. I mean, certainly I'm hearing it, and I know that our audience is as well. Something that we had a question submitted ahead of time about if you could either or both of you maybe speak a little bit about this, is body image and cancer in the LGBTQIA plus community. Just any thoughts on that?
yeah, I can start and chat a little bit about that. Um, my partner and I, we have currently been together for a little over 6 years, and during my diagnosis and treatment, I was about 4 years in. Um, and and I think for me personally, well, I had a mastectomy and then did chemo radiation, and now I'm on hormone therapy. Having surgery alone, and initially it was the idea of losing a part of my body, and then having to come to terms with, okay, this is what I need to do because there's a tumor in here, and it's got to go. I know my partner was very supportive throughout the whole entire journey, and I just did not feel good in the skin that I was, in the skin that I was in, and how my body looked different, and so it was uncomfortable for me when my partner wanted to, touch my body or be intimate, and so it does have that toll on you, again mentally, and with me, being that my cancer was feeding off of my hormones, my sex drive just went down to essentially non-existent. And so that, in and of itself, when I'm kind of feeling insecure about my body, and then, our, level of intimacy changing. So that was hard.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that with us. Any thoughts, Cassandra, about that?
I don't have anything to add. I think Victoria's share was.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think we have time for somehow only one more question. This part always flies. So I'm just going to take a quick peek, if you all will bear with me a moment, and try to pick one because we have a lot. I'm going to try to combine a couple thoughts here that we had from different people. So I'm thinking back to what you said earlier, Cassandra, about two-dimensional healthcare, and if I've got it right, about not really treating that whole person. And the need to create safety. And then I think Victoria, you spoke about the healthcare providers taking steps to create room for compassion, to create pause. And for probably more than just the person who asked about this one element here that I'm about to say, it's probably true for a number of people here that the providers, at least some of the providers, are experiencing roadblocks in their healthcare systems. Not so, while the individual healthcare provider may be really receptive and taking steps to do these things, treat the whole person, ask important questions, create space, the healthcare system, there might be barriers there. And so how can a healthcare provider, or what are some of the steps that they can take within their system, within the multidisciplinary team, to try to help create kind of more systemic change that will benefit, individual patients, but also kind of the larger patient community. So, and it's a complicated question. It's a good one. I'm glad somebody asked about it. And I tried to tie in some of your other concepts. So any thoughts you have there?
Can start. I think something I think about is first starting with just naming it. And so, because I noticed that when I've had an abundance of appointments, I noticed that my oncologist doesn't have that much time. So it's like the appointments are very limited. And so I feel like being able to name it and say that I want to try to meet and treat all of the needs that you have, physically, emotionally, mentally, all of that. And right now I am limited. They don't necessarily have to go into the specifics of the whole system, being flawed in some ways, but I think naming it and then them passing on the info to whether it's a nurse navigator or another healthcare provider that does have more time to, almost like fill in the holes and fill in the gap, until, the system as a whole can improve to where, the providers can just have this whole more like holistic approach of, meeting all the different needs of a patient.
Great. Thank you. Those are some really great recommendations, and just the naming it feels so important. So thank you, Victoria. How about you, Cassandra? Any thoughts here?
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with Victoria. I think just naming, right? Just acknowledging and naming what the situation is, and in just kind of being able to say like this is kind of this is what I would hope for. And I would also say to really kind of look into community resources. Some communities, not all communities have this, but some communities have resources that can provide support to folks and show up and kind of fill in some of those gaps, because really a lot of this is about too, I think, wanting to be seen, right? Wanting to be like that what I'm going through is seen by someone and that it's acknowledged. But really what oncologists can do is get to know local resources, so that way even if they can't do some of those things or facilitate certain things, that they can have a strong relationship with the community, so that way that particular patient doesn't kind of get lost, right? That there's someone kind of showing that care, so that way they're getting what they need.
Great, thank you. Such great recommendations. And I noticed somebody writing into the chat a moment ago as you were speaking, something that I was thinking, and I know I'm not the only one, which is just how in this very rich conversation, you've given everybody in the audience some really clear things that they can do kind of immediately in their patient care and in their practice to help create change and work with their patients in a different way. So somebody else put in, there've just been, I've seen them kind of flash on the screen that you are just both beautiful presenters. I want to pass that along. I could not agree more. I thank you so very deeply from LBBC. It has been an absolute joy to plan this presentation with you, but even more so to have this time with you and for everything that you shared so very personally and about your professional experience as well. We really all value that so very much and value you. I want to thank the audience too, because you are a critical part of this, even though we're not all in a room together, we're in the same space during this time. And I want to thank you for being really engaged in the chat and asking really meaningful questions. So thank you, because we don't do this without you. We wouldn't do it without you. And you're really, really important too. So I'm just going to take a moment to wrap us up. I want to again recognize the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention for their support of this program. And just a reminder that we have an evaluation link coming out to all of you today, and please remember to complete it for us no later than October 12th. So we do have a request for you. We wanted to ask for your help with an effort that Living Beyond Breast Cancer and Facing Our Risk of Cancer Empowered, or FORCE, is joined together to help understand the gaps in breast cancer information and resources among people who are transgender, non-binary, or gender diverse. As part of this work, we are asking healthcare providers and people who work at breast cancer advocacy organizations to share with us how their health system or organization collects information and addresses the needs of this priority community. So our survey is going to be open for just a couple more days, but we'd really appreciate it if you haven't already done it for us, because we have asked many of you before, but if you could take a couple minutes to complete it for us, we'd really appreciate it. And I think Sarah just posted the survey link in the chat for us. So if you can click on that before you close out of the program in a minute, that would be great. So just another quick reminder for those of you who requested contact hours or CEs for nurses, social workers, or board certified patient advocates, or a certificate of participation, you'll be emailed your certificate by November 9th. We will also send a link to this program recording over the next 1 to 2 weeks. So thank you so very much for joining us today, and thank you so much for the care that you provide to people with breast cancer. Please take good care and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. This does conclude today's program. You may disconnect at this time. Thank you for your participation and enjoy the rest of your day.